Okay, guys. So today we're doing, I suppose, I think it's probably the most interesting topic we'll do for the week anyway, is the 1916 Easter Rising. Um, Something that's always fascinated me when we were in school. Um, I suppose the fact that it's such recent history. I mean, when I was in school, it was only 80 years or less, even 70 years before I was born. So, I mean, for ourselves here, it's still only just over 100 years ago, which is still very recent. To give you an example, when I was growing up, people who had fought in the Rising were still alive. So, you know, it was born out of, I suppose, huge necessity in a way. The fact that, Ireland, the rebels felt that Ireland was being suppressed by English rule, and these men and women that fought in the Rising, they were taking a huge risk. To have the might of, to come up against the might of the British Empire and the power of the soldiers, the British Army at the time. It was a huge gamble, and it was a huge risk take, really. And ultimately, it did end in failure. However, it was a catalyst, or the word I'm looking for was it kind of cemented the seed that um, independence was possible and that we needed to do it. A lot of people at the time were very much against the rebels. People who lived in Dublin, especially, and throughout the country, were very much against the rebels and blamed them for the reason that the whole city was destroyed and bombed. However, public opinion changed, and the reason it changed was due to the executions. All the leaders in 1916 were executed, shot in the yard in Kilmainham, with the exception of Eamon de Valera, because he was born in the USA. And Eamon de Valera was a person who went on to become Taoiseach and President of Ireland, and Countess Markievicz, who was a woman. So they were the two who avoided it. One of the main drivers behind it was James Connolly, who was a trade union leader, and he put a huge banner on top of the on top of the Liberty Hall at the beginning of the Rising. So we'll start here anyway. Ireland in 1916. So most Irish people supported Britain during World War One. So bear in mind, Britain was fighting in World War One. World War One had started in 1914. So this this occurred in the middle of 1914. Catholics and Protestants from the north and south of the country joined the British Army. While a terrible war was being fought in Europe, Ireland seemed peaceful. Home rule had been promised as soon as the war was over. So this is where Britain had encouraged Ireland to help them in the fight against the Germans, and their promise was that they would give power back to Ireland once the war was over. However, there was no reason to expect a rebellion in 1916. However, there were a small group of people who believed that World War One had nothing to do with Ireland. James Connolly, the Irish trade union leader and founder of the Labour Party, had a large banner displayed in Liberty Hall. It read, "We serve neither king nor Kaiser, but Ireland." So we serve neither king, referring to the King of England, nor Kaiser, who was in charge of Germany at the time, but Ireland. So essentially, they were trying to reinforce their neutrality, that they were neutral, they weren't backing Britain and they weren't backing Germany, and that Ireland was its own independent state. The Irish Volunteers was an armed force set up in 1913 to fight for Home Rule. A minority of its members, around 10,000, refused to fight for Britain in World War One. A small number of these belonged to a secret organisation called the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB. The aim of the IRB was to set up an Irish Republic, and it believed that an armed rebellion was the only way to achieve this. Now that Britain was busy fighting World War One, the IRB decided it was a good time for a rebellion in Ireland. Okay, so the plans for the rebellion. Now, the plans for the rebellion were absolutely catastrophic because essentially the rebellion was awful badly planned. You wouldn't believe how badly planned it was. Would you believe that they actually put an ad in the newspaper saying that the rebellion wasn't going to take place? And some people didn't know whether it was going through or not. Talk about the doubt. So the communication was very poor. Two of the most important leaders of the IRB were Thomas Clarke and Sean McDermott. They made plans for a rebellion, which they kept secret from the leaders of the Irish Volunteers. The rebellion or rising would begin on Easter Sunday, April 23rd, 1916. James Connolly agreed that the Irish Citizen Army, which had founded in 1913 to protect striking workers, would support the rising. Now, did you know that Kerry played a huge part in the 1916 rising and the lead up to it as well? Sir Roger Casement was involved in trying to get arms in. And where they were trying to bring him in was bring him in through County Kerry. Sir Roger Casement, a British civil servant from County Antrim, travelled to Germany and organised a shipment of arms for the IRB. He sailed back to Ireland on a German ship called the Odd Norge, which carried 20,000 rifles intended for the IRB. The Royal Navy captured the Odd Norge off the coast of County Kerry and directed it into Cork Harbour. Once the Odd Norge reached the Cork Harbour, its captain quickly scuttled it, sank it. So he drilled holes in underneath the boat to sink the boat. You had 20,000 rifles in it. Why didn't he want to give the rifles to the British? Essentially because they didn't want the British Army using them back against the Germans. So Casement landed by U-boat at Bannistrand near Tralee, where he was immediately arrested. So he was arrested on Bannistrand in North Kerry and brought to Tralee. So, you know, a lot of the British were outraged by this because the fact that the IRB were going behind their backs and going to the Germans, the enemy, to get the guns, really upset them. The arrestment of Casey and the loss of the rifles caused confusion amongst those preparing for the Easter Rising. Owen MacNeill, the leader of the Irish Volunteers, learned about the IRB plans. He tried to cancel the rising by placing a coded message in a newspaper called An Clod of Shoeless. Despite this, the IRB with very few weapons and little or no chance of success, decided to go ahead with the rising on Easter Monday, April 24, 1916. Its members knew that the rising could not be a military success, but they believed their actions would inspire others to fight for Irish freedom. But these men knew that there was a good chance they were going to be killed. They knew there was a very slim chance they were going to win, if none, but they still decided to go ahead with it. So what I want to try and do is I want you to do a timeline of the week, okay? So we're beginning here on, we was actually begin it on Easter Sunday, where the rising had been cancelled. The planned rising had been cancelled and the ad had gone in the newspaper. That's the first day, going on to Easter Monday. Okay, so Easter Monday. So we're going to do a timeline of the whole week of events. Easter Monday, march to GPO. On Easter Monday, 1916, a small group of men marched from Liberty Hall to the General Post Office GPO, Sackville Street, now O'Connell Street. They were led by the Secret Military Council of the IRB and James Connolly. A women's organisation called Cummin Man also marched with them. Some wore the grey-green uniform of the Irish Volunteers, and others wore the dark green uniform of the Irish Citizen Army. They were armed with rifles, handguns, and shotguns, but had very little ammunition. As soon as they reached the GPO, the rebels charged inside and barricaded the entrances. 2 British soldiers who happened to be buying stamps in GPO became the first prisoners of war. The rebels moved the British flag from the flagpole and hoisted up 2 flags in place, a green, white and gold tricolour, and a green flag bearing the words Irish Republic. Padraig Pearse, who was actually incidentally a school teacher and a barrister, a member of the IRB, stood on the pavement outside the GPO and read out the proclamation of the Irish Republic. Onlookers did not understand and thought it was a joke. Small groups of men seized a number of buildings around the Dublin city centre, including Liberty Hall, Boland's Mills. The Easter Rising had begun. Okay, so if you look at the map here in your book on page 56, we've got O'Connell Street, the GPO, where's the headquarters of it. They've also taken over St. James's Hospital, Stephen's Green, Jacobs Mills, the biscuit factory, the Four Courts, Boland's Mills, Northumberland Road as well. So they've these places taken over. Although there were only 2,000, so on to the next day, although there were only 2,000 rebels in the Easter Rising, they took everybody by surprise. On Easter Monday evening, more than 5,000 British soldiers were deployed from the Curragh barracks in Kildare to Dublin. On Tuesday morning, they took up their positions in the city, armed with machine guns and heavy artillery. In the College of Surgeons, there were about 100 rebels, men, women, and boys as young as 14. Under the command of Countess Markievicz, the British opened fire and killed 5 of them. So this was inside in the College of Surgeons. This is where that battle had taken place. On Wednesday, April 26th, a British fisheries patrol boat, the Helga, sailed up the River Liffey and attacked Liberty Hall and Boland's Mills. British soldiers marching into the city from Knightstown, now Dunleary, met with a fierce attack at Mount Street Bridge, in which 200 of their numbers were killed. The British began to attack the GPO with heavy artillery and machine guns. So that's leading us up onto Wednesday. So you can see that it's developing into a very vicious battle. Huge amount of gunshots, ammunition being thrown around the place, bullets, guns, and think about the people, the children who were caught up in it as well. There was a book went out a few years ago about the number of children, innocent children and civilians, who had been killed during the 1916 Rising. Thursday, April 27th. At 10 a.m. on Thursday, the British began to bombard Sackville Street, which is now called O'Connell Street. By the end of the day, part of the street was in flames. James Connolly was seriously wounded on his way from Middle Abbey Street to GPO. Ferocious fighting continued all day at the South Dublin Union in James Street. Now, essentially by Friday, Thursday was a big loss to the rebels, especially with James Connolly being injured as well. On Friday, April 28th, General Maxwell arrived from England to take command of the British forces. The roof of the GPO caught fire at 4 p.m. By 9 p.m., the building was a burning ruin. The rebels evacuated the GPO and went to Moore Street. So essentially, like their own base of where they were going has now been destroyed. The base of where they were taking over the rebels has been destroyed. Do you think it would have made a huge difference if the rebels had received the guns from the Odd? I think it would have made a huge difference. What do you think? Name 2 leaders of the Easter Rising. Do you think the Easter Rising was a good idea? Why do you say so? Okay, so was it a good idea? Was it not a good idea? Based on what you've read so far, what do you think of it? Okay, so we're just going to read up as far as there for today. If you can answer those questions 1, 2, 3, and start working on the timeline for the week. And I'm going to put up a bit more information as well on Seesaw and a few good links to a few videos that are worth watching for the quiz as well this week. Okay, guys, talk to you soon.